This video focuses on the successes and the failures of the League of Nations during the 1920s. Now, I've already made a video about the Treaty of Versailles and the aims of the Big Three, and really how the Big Three left the peace negotiations without anyone really being happy about the outcome. Georges Clemenceau of France believed that the treaty was not harsh enough. Woodrow Wilson had drawn up his 14 points, which he aimed to be more lenient towards Germany and have lasting trade with them, with Lloyd George and Great Britain somewhere in the middle, wanting Germany to foot the bill of the war, but at the same time wanting to maintain trade and not wanting to be too harsh. Now remember, it was Wilson's idea to have a League of Nations where the countries would get together and air out their differences rather than resorting to war. Yet the USA did not join the League of Nations.
When the Treaty of Versailles was written, the basic rules about how the League of Nations was going to work was included at the start of the document. All countries that signed the treaty agreed to stick to the rules of how the League was going to be run. So who joined the League of Nations? Well, when the League was founded, there were 42 members, and this rose to 58 by 1934. There were 4 permanent members of the Council who made all the big decisions: Britain, France, Italy, and Japan. Some of the major countries in the world, such as the USA and Russia, were not part of the League of Nations.
So we really need to evaluate the successes and failures of the League of Nations, and really what part did America not taking part in the League have to play? And if the League really did help people, then did Germany and Russia miss out from not being invited to join it? Were ordinary German people and ordinary Russian people being punished, for example, because they weren't getting the benefits and help from this new organisation?
Well, by 1921, the League had helped to free 427,000 of the 500,000 prisoners of war and return them to their homelands. It found 1.5 million refugees from civil war new homes. The same with 600,000 Greeks fleeing from Turkey in 1922. Refugee camps were set up and doctors were sent to treat illnesses like smallpox. The League worked with governments in Russia to organize education programs to teach people about how typhus is spread. The League helped Greece to set up social insurance and gave financial aid to those unemployed due to sickness. 77 countries agreed to the minimum wage. The League started an international campaign to kill mosquitoes which spread diseases like malaria and yellow fever. And finally, it set up the World Health Organization, which still exists today.
So looking at that, the League didn't necessarily exclude ordinary people from those countries that were excluded from joining. So let's have a little look at the successes and the failures of the League of Nations in the 1920s.
So how successful was the League in keeping peace in the 1920s? Well, starting with Vilnius. Vilnius was the capital of the new country known as Lithuania. However, the majority of people were Polish. When the Polish army took control of the city, Lithuania asked the League for help. The League did nothing. Why? France saw Poland as a potential ally with Germany in the middle. Britain would not send troops. The League then had to deal with conflict between Sweden and Finland over the Åland Islands. Both threatened war with each other. The League decided they should go to Finland, but they could not build forts or use it as a base. Sweden agreed, and the League had successfully avoided war.
So hold that thought. This is where we need to think about the higher level skills. Would a conflict between Sweden and Finland potentially be as damaging as a conflict, let's say, between Lithuania and Poland over Vilnius? Now, we know that the creation of Poland, for example, creates a lot of tension between Germany and Russia, and of course, the newly formed Lithuania. Also, remember, Poland was created out of those countries. In comparison with the Åland Islands, we've got 2 countries that are not really known for being warlike countries, not in the modern world anyway. But would this be as big a success if the League, let's say, had avoided a Polish invasion of Lithuania? This reminds me of something.
Good afternoon to you. Earlier on today, apparently a woman rang the BBC and said she heard that there's a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't. But having said that, actually, the weather will become very windy, but most of the strong winds, incidentally, will be down over Spain and across into France as well.
Forget that bit.
Germany and Poland were beginning to fall out over Upper Silesia, which was on the border. Both nations wanted it, so a plebiscite was given to the people. 60% voted Germany, but Poland were unhappy about the vote, thinking it was unfair. Eventually, it was split between both sides, but both sides were unhappy. Germany lost 3/4 of the coal mines in the area. Poland maintained only 1/3 of Upper Silesian land. Many Polish people now found themselves living on German territory. Now, an agreement was needed between Greece and Albania over who ruled Corfu. Italian General Tellini was murdered when surveying the area. Mussolini was angry with Greece and invaded Corfu. Mussolini was unsatisfied that there was no compensation and went to the Confederation of Ambassadors. When Greece retaliated, however, to Bulgarian soldiers murdering Greek soldiers on the border, Greece was condemned widely by the League. Greece then exposed the League as being hypocritical because they did nothing to help them with Mussolini's invasion of Corfu.
So I may need to do another video later on about how the League was further undermined as we got into the 30s and was almost really defunct by the time war starts in Europe in 1939.
The League failed to resolve further conflicts into the 1930s. The two most famous, arguably the Manchurian crisis and the Abyssinian crisis. Now, with the Manchurian crisis, Japan's economy was in crisis due to the Wall Street crash. On the 18th of September 1931, there was an explosion on the South Manchurian Railway, a company owned by Japan. This was known as the Mukden Incident, and the Japanese used this as an excuse to invade Manchuria. Lord Lytton led a commission and wrote a report after spending a year in Japan and found that the Japanese were in the wrong. However, Japan ignored the League of Nations and left it. In Abyssinia, Italian soldiers clashed with Abyssinians at Valval, and the League tried to intervene but could not persuade Mussolini to stop his invasion of Abyssinia. The League condemned Mussolini's troops entering the area and his use of chemical weapons and terror on local tribal villages.
So seeing as how my students are still working with that AQA spec, let's have a look at an exam question.
So let's now look at a 4-mark exam question. Question 1 on this paper. Source A is critical of the League of Nations. How do you know? Explain your answer using source A and your own contextual knowledge.
So this is a very famous source from a pool of sources that is often used by the exam board. So let's have a closer look at it.
On the right-hand side, we've got Uncle Sam, who is a personification of the US government. We've got some of the major powers in the League of Nations that are represented on the bricks of this bridge. There's a section of the bridge missing. The League of Nations is represented by this bridge that, as you can see, is designed by the USA. Now, Uncle Sam is leaning on the missing keystone. And if we saw the provenance on the previous page, then we would have seen that this cartoon was published in Punch magazine in December 1919. Now, earlier that year, Woodrow Wilson had promoted the League of Nations to the Paris Peace Conference. At the time of the cartoon, the US was unwilling to take part in the League of Nations. The cartoon suggests that the League will not work properly without the US. It will be too weak to keep peace going. Now, as this is a 4-marker, you might want to take 5 minutes or so to have a go at this answer. Remember, just one paragraph. Here's a mark scheme that I've shown my students, and as you can see, if you're in a position to peer assess, then please do so. Otherwise, you can mark your own work.
So looking at that mark scheme, you will realise it is possible to get 4 marks out of 4 without mentioning both the provenance and the content of the source. And although it is possible to get full marks without mentioning both the content and the provenance, I think it's good practice to analyse both anyway. Have a look at this exemplar answer.
Source D opposes the League of Nations because it shows that the USA is an important power that is missing from the League of Nations. In the metaphorical bridge, Uncle Sam is shown to be leaning on the missing keystone, which is labelled USA. This missing stone makes the rest of the bridge weak and unstable. Evidence to support this is that the USA had a strong military and had fought in World War I and was becoming the world's leading economy. It would therefore have been able to support the League with any sanctions that were required against any nations that were being aggressive or not abiding by international law. For example, a League of Nations that included the USA may have been able to have dealt with the crisis in Vilnius more effectively, helping people of Lithuania to protect themselves from an invasion.
Now, I do hope you've found this video helpful. If so, please do subscribe, please give it a like, please make kind comments, and I hope to make another one for you soon. In the meantime, take care and stay safe.